Thank you so much to the musicians. I thought I'd share with you a few thoughts on this wonderful chapter of Hall of Fame of the old men of the Old Testament of faith. At the moment we have a changing world with so much uncertainty and unfortunately two very corrupt leaders in charge of the superpowers, and sometimes it is worrying to wonder what the future holds. And I've taken great comfort from what we read this morning in Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews, the writer we think was Paul, but we don't really know, but it's clearly written with a Jewish angle in mind. And it shows the faithfulness of God in a very wonderful way. But how can we have faith in God ourselves? And looking at verses 1 and 2 gives us some answers. To have faith is to be sure of the things we hope for, to be certain of the things we cannot see. Now, eyesight is a sense of the evidence of things around us. But the spiritual sight is a faith of evidence of things we cannot see around us, but we still hope for them. And the Bible also tells us in verse 6, whoever comes to God must have faith that God exists, and he rewards all those who seek him. So we can have no doubt that if we can believe God exists, we can come into his presence with the assurance that he is with us, and we are not facing life alone. Now, Hebrews 11 lists some of the great men of faith in the Old Testament, and I'm going to look at just one of them. It was Enoch. Now, Enoch had a very long life. In Genesis chapter 4, verses 21, chapter 5, verses 21-24, he walked with God every step of the way. Some versions say he had fellowship with God. And in fact, he never was found when he died. They say he was taken up into heaven. But clearly he walked in step with his God. And he followed him along life's way. And it's being led along in step with God that gives us that faith, makes our faith stronger. And one of the things I had to get used to when I lost my sight was having to be shown where to go, especially in places that I didn't know. And I found guides do vary considerably. Some are very, very good, some are a little bit dodgy, and the worst ones are the grandchildren. But I'm so glad that I have a guiding hand, and it's a great thrill to me that every day, even when things look a bit bleak and when I've made wrong choices and bad decisions, I still have that faith in God to know that I'm not alone and I can put my trust in him. And it's that willingness to put our trust in God that he will reward us and to take care of us. I'm going to share with you a memoir of a remarkable man called Wally Nuru. Wally Nuru has recently written a memoir of his book called Running Blind. He was an Afghan born in 1989, and on September 29th, 2009, aged nearly 20, he lost his sight in Herat in Afghanistan. He was, as he said, brought up as a child in war. He never knew peace. It was civil war right from the day he was born. But he loved running, and he also had a bent for languages. He could learn English, and so to get a job when he left school, he offered his services to the British and American forces to be a liaison officer, not a soldier, but a liaison officer to translate and to prevent misunderstandings between the occupying Western forces and local villagers in Afghanistan. It was a very brave thing to do. He was putting his life at risk, and unfortunately on that day in September he was caught up in a shell attack which immediately left him totally blind and substantial damage to his face. And unfortunately he was sent to a military hospital run by the Afghan Medical Corps because they thought he was just an ordinary soldier, not an elite interpreter. They called them Terps, actually. And he was nearly died. He was on a respirator for many weeks and so on. But one day he heard an American doctor visiting the ward, and he whispered to the American doctor that he said, can you get me into a more advanced hospital care situation? And the American doctor took up his case, and he was transferred to a Western hospital where he eventually recovered, physically recovered. But of course, then began the road to recovery in terms of getting your life back on track. What could he do? In Afghanistan, for any disabled person, the future was very, very bleak indeed. And some families regarded them as a burden. He didn't want to be a burden, and he was at home, stuck at home all the time. The streets were very difficult to negotiate. And of course the big question was, who wants to marry a blind guy? Especially in Afghanistan. But his father had friends with a daughter who was willing to do just that. So he got married to his wife, and about a year later he received a phone call from the British Embassy saying they'd heard about his case and the fact that he was working for the British Army. Would he like to go and live in Britain? Well, it's a bit of a decision, not an easy one because they're a very close-knit family, but he also recognised that living where he was, the future was very difficult. So they went, and whilst he was picking up pieces of his life, getting over depression, and clinging to his faith, of course, which sustained him, they found him a guide to take him running. Now, I'd never been much of a runner. I love my swimming, but I'm not much of a runner. But anyway, Wally describes how he learns to do marathon runs in Western sporting events. And they put a strap on his right wrist, which is fed around the strap of the left wrist of his guide. And they have to practice for a while to get in step. And Wally began getting gold medals all over the show. Running was his salvation. Running was his release, acceptance he could never be able to see again. And he rebuilt his life completely. And a wonderful story of courage and determination. And he's now working in Britain, and he has 3 or 4 children, and they're settled there, and they have WhatsApp talks with friends back in Kabul, and life's turned the corner for Wally. So Hebrews chapter 11 verse 6 says, whoever comes to God must have faith that God exists, and he rewards those who seek him. And this has been the big puzzle for me over many years, especially when I was working in Africa many years ago, that there were millions of people who never heard about Jesus Christ, but who earnestly sought the presence of God, who wanted to find God. And I think that this verse gives me the feeling that, yes, anybody who seeks God will find him, and they will be blessed. And it's the interfaith activity that we've had in this church in recent years that's really encouraged me with this sense of God caring for all people who seek him. And especially enjoyed the iftar over the last 3 years, I think it is. And we've now got new friends in different faiths, but we're all following, looking to God. So I'm going to share with you a very interesting little thing that happened in 1599. It's a very long time ago. But going back a little bit further, in 1572 there was a big battle off the coast of Greece between the Spanish Catholic Christians and the Islamic people from the Middle East. And the Turkish people lost. And England became increasingly isolated because they had just gone through the leaving the Catholic Church of Rome. It was all a matter of power struggle, really. But Elizabeth I wanted to make friends as a Protestant with an Islamic country. And what gift could she send to the Sultan of Istanbul? Well, I won't ask you to guess, but she actually sent an organ. Imagine that, an organ with pedals, bellows, 2 keyboards, the works. And it was built by Thomas Dallam, who was a famous organ builder at that time. Anyway, the organ arrived in Istanbul as a special gift of friendship between the 2 religions. But it was middle of summer, and the temperatures in Istanbul were considerably warmer than in London, and you can't imagine what happened, but the glue began to melt and the organ began to fall to pieces. So with great effort, poor Thomas spent many hours of the week struggling to use Turkish glue and rebuild his organ. It was ready just in time for it to be played to the Sultan, and the Sultan loved it. I think it's a true story, and it's just so sad to see all this infighting for power and domination in even the world today. It hasn't changed, but it's much worse today because we're capable of doing so much more destruction and so much more harm. But somehow my hope is based on Psalm 118, verse 8. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His steadfast love endures forever. Amen.